Hi again, kiddos. We are now going to read Chapter 2 of The Dragons of Blue Land. I want to point out again that the name of the chapter is Mr. and Mrs. Wagon Wheel. I'd like you to take a look at your maps. If you recall, Chapter 1 started where the dragon took off from this little wharf here, flew for a while, came to a culvert, tried to get fit in there, but he was too big, and then flew for a while again, tried to get into this culvert, but again, that culvert was also too small. He flew for a while again, and he went past his farm, finally got to a culvert that was big enough for him to be in. However, it was, like I said, past a farm, and guess what the name of that farm is? Wagon Wheel Farm. And yes, Mr. and Mrs. Wagon Wheel own that farm, run that farm. Let's begin. But someone had seen the dragon. At least he was sure he'd seen something blue and yellow and gold galloping down the road. It was Mr. Wagon Wheel, the farmer living in the yellow farmhouse, who had just been closing his window as the dragon ran past. "What's that galloping noise?" asked Mrs. Wagon Wheel, sitting up in bed.
"A large blue monster just ran by, and after breakfast I'm going to find out all about it,"
yelled Mr. Wagon Wheel, jumping into his clothes and rushing off to put the cows in the barn for milking. Mrs. Wagon Wheel, meanwhile, made pancakes and coffee. You know what? When there's no pictures, I think I'll just read to you like this, kids, okay? She made pancakes and coffee, but forgot to boil the eggs. She was horribly upset at the thought of a monster rushing past her house at 5 o'clock in the morning. Mr. Wagon Wheel hurried through the milking, let the cows into the pasture, and dashed back to the kitchen. He was anxious to eat and be off after the blue demon, as he had decided to call whatever it was. He swallowed a pancake whole and banged 2 eggs on the side of his cup. Splop! Raw egg flew all over the table, and Mr. Wagon Wheel, Mrs. Wagon Wheel had forgotten to boil the eggs, of course.
"Martha, what's the matter with you?"
yelled Mr. Wagon Wheel. "Stop, Dixie." "Oh, I'm sorry," said Mrs. Wagon Wheel. "I'm so upset about that horrible monster. I don't know what I'm doing." And she nervously slipped a pancake instead of her handkerchief into her apron pocket.
"Well, boil more eggs,"
roared Mr. Wagon Wheel, going to the sink to wash off his face and hands and shirt and overalls. Now Mr. Wagon Wheel liked his eggs hard, very hard, and as he waited for them to get very hard, more pictures. There's Mrs. Wagon Wheel cooking. It began to rain. It was only a drizzly rain, but enough to wash away the dragon's footprints in the dusty road. "Drat it!" thundered Mr. Wagon Wheel, looking out the window.
"It's raining."
"I thought we needed rain, dear," said Mrs. Wagon Wheel.
"We do, but why can't it wait until I capture the blue demon? Now maybe I'll never find him."
"Maybe it's just as well," said Mrs. Wagon Wheel, carefully putting a spoonful of salt into her coffee. Salt? Oh, I think she meant to put sugar.
"Well, I can see you have no spirit of adventure," grumped Mr. Wagon Wheel, peeling his at last ready very hard eggs. He picked up his rifle, a strong rope,
and put on his raincoat and boots.
"I'm off,"
he yelled, and he slammed the door. No pictures for a few moments. He'll never come back, thought Mrs. Wagon Wheel, and she quietly sat down to cry. Mr. Wagon Wheel ran down the road, pouncing on bushes, peering behind trees, and examining roadside ditches, yelling all the while,
"Coming, ready or not."
He made such a racket that the cows heard him in plenty of time. They huddled around a big culvert where the baby dragon was hiding and pretended to be busy drinking water, for they had found the sleeping dragon while Mr. Wagon Wheel was eating his very hard eggs. "Wake up," they had said, "and tell us what you are and what you're doing in our culvert." The dragon woke up with a start, and then he smiled at the friendly cows. "I'm a baby dragon," he explained, "and I'm on my way home to the great high mountains of Blue Land." "But what are you doing in our culvert?" asked the cow. "I'm hiding. You see, most people think that there are no dragons left, and if I should be captured, I'd surely end up in a zoo or a circus and never get home again." "Shh," said another cow. "I think I hear Mr. Wagon Wheel now." All through milking time, he was muttering about catching a blue demon. He must have meant you. It was then that the cows huddled around the opening to the culvert, and the dragon crouched down on his stomach in the water. So here's the nice cows surrounding the baby dragon so Mr. Wagon Wheel can't see him. They want to help him so he can get home. And there's the culvert.
"The culvert!"
yelled Mr. Wagon Wheel, brandishing his rifle.
"An excellent hiding place for the blue demon."
And he started down the bank on the other side of the road.
"It's all over now."
It's all over now, thought the dragon, who could tell where the farmer was from the noise he was making. But just then, Mr. Wagon Wheel looked across the road at his peaceful cows and thought,
"My cows would be in a panic if the demon were hiding here."
He turned back up the bank and ran down the road, beating the bushes and peering behind trees. The cows gazed nearby all day long, talking to the dragon and telling him when it was safe to come out of the culvert. Toward evening, they heard Mr. Wagon Wheel stamping back along the road, yelling,
"Hoopla! All of you, into the barn!"
And as they wandered off, they quietly warned the dragon, "Leave just as soon as he goes to the barn. It's just like him to be out looking for you by flashlight after supper." And they were right. Long after the dragon had flown far beyond the yellow farmhouse and culvert, Mr. Wagon Wheel was shooting into bushes. Mrs. Wagon Wheel was in bed with a case of nerves. All right, so our next video, I will be reading chapter 3, which is called The Men on the Slope. All right, see you then, kiddos.